I know North Korean nuclear issue is a very hot topic, but too many panels on North Korean and the nuclear issue. Now we have reaching the marginal utility of North Korean nuclear issue, and particularly Bob, you should have been, you have been overexploited by the Jeju people, and that means you're very, very popular. 오늘 사회를 맡은 문정인입니다. 오늘 패널리스트 잠깐 소개를 하겠습니다. 로버트 갈루치 대사는 아마 방금 전에 이제 설명을 하셨고요. 우리 제네바 합의를 했던 장본인입니다. 그 강석주 당시 북한 부상하고 같이 해서 제네바 합의를 하신 분이고, 그 후에 카네기 재단의 이제 이사장도 하셨고, 그 다음에 지금 조지타운 대학교에 이제 석좌 교수 계시고 봅니다. 우리 김성환 장관님 여러분 잘 아시더라고요. 외교통상부 장관님을 하셨고요. 외교안보 수석도 하셨고, 지금은 한양대학교 이제 특임 교수로 계십니다. 우선 로버트 갈루치 아까 박수 치셨지만 한 번 더 쳐주십시오. 네. 우리 김성환 장관님도 박수 한 번 좀 쳐주시고. Peter Hayes, he's about 2 meters high. Therefore, very, very tall person. And he has a double nationalities. He's Australian as well as American citizen. Okay? But he spent more time in Australia than in San Francisco. But he was a recipient of the MacArthur Foundation's Genius Fellowship in 1980s. I say early 1980s, right? 2000? It was that late. Anyhow, he was he was envied by so many so-called social scientists throughout the world. That you got $1 million for the prize? You can't remember, but with that money he founded the Nautilus Institute. Now Nautilus Institute has become most prominent private think tank for nuclear issues, security issues, and sustainable development. And we have a Hwang Yong-soo, but originally, Jo Se-young supposed to be the panelist, but he was a then Chancellor of Korea National Diplomatic Academy, but he was appointed as a first Vice Foreign Minister. Therefore, he could not come. Now he's the chair of the panel on the recent scandal about the leaking of, secret to the, opposition, politician. Therefore, anyhow, for whatever reasons, he could not attend it, and Dr. Yong-soo Hwang kindly agreed to serve as a panelist. Yong-soo Hwang, he was a senior vice president of a Korea Atomic Research Institute, and he got his PhD in nuclear engineering from University of California, Berkeley, and he has been, I would say that he's a number one expert in North Korean nuclear issue, perhaps along with Siegfried Hecker of Stanford University. He has all the technical details of North Korean nuclear issues. And what I will do is this, our title is, North Korean nuclear endgame. Instead of me asking each panelist to give a kind of talks, what I will do is I will just go to the straightforward answer the questions to them so that they can answer, and we'll spend about 40 to 50 minutes for our own discussion, and then I'll open it to the floor. But Bob has to go to the airport immediately after this session, and also Minister Kim also has to go to the airport immediately after this session. Therefore, I will try to end this session before around 6:30. Now I won't go up to 6:40, right? So that you can have safe travel. Okay. Bob, sir, you have been dealing with North Korea for a long time, not only as a U.S. government official, but also as this kind of track two channel. Does really North Korea want to give up its nuclear weapons? Does Chairman Kim Jong-un have an intention and will to denuclearize?
We used to call that the $64,000 question, right? That divides. If we transported ourselves, turn into to Washington now, and we went around and took a poll, about half the people would say the North will never give up their nuclear weapons. And the other half will say, maybe, and I'm on the maybe side. I wasn't sure in 1993-94 that they would give up their plutonium production, which was at that time only source, but they did. Maybe they did because they were going to cheat with the Pakistanis and enrichment. I don't know. Right now we're at another one of those critical points. Joe Witt just called it a hinge point, I think. And I'm of the view that you, the Republic of Korea, and we, the United States, would be making a mistake if we didn't try to test the Chairman Kim's proposition that he is prepared to give up nuclear weapons, notwithstanding that people say, when I would say something like that, that I don't know what you're smoking, but I'd like to have some of that. I think that trying to frame that deal, trying to figure out what it looks like, trying to be precise about what denuclearization means is worth it, and we ought to give it a try. I'm not filled with confidence that it'll work, but we ought to find out.
Well, when I was in Washington, I found that I interviewed almost 100 pundits in Washington, D.C. 30% skeptical, 30% cynical, even asking that question, 30% outright pessimist, 10% optimist. Out of 10%, 9% was a prudent optimist or cautious optimist, 1% authentic optimist. In fact, Steve Biegun was here about 3 weeks ago, and I had a chance to talk with him, and I gave that expression, and then he told me that I asked him, which category do you belong? And he told me, I'm optimist, authentic and truly optimist. And Alex Ong, Alison Hooker, Kevin Kim, they're all authentic optimists. And who else? They added one more point. President Trump is a real optimist. But anyhow, that is what he told me. But Minister Kim, what is in South Korea? I know that there are, a wide variety of opinions on whether North Korea will give up nuclear weapons or not. But
you remember that last year, after the Singapore summit, we had the same session here in Jeju Forum, and at that time it was kind of full of hope and expectation. But nowadays, in the previous session, Ambassador Lee Do-hoon, he said he is still cautiously optimistic. But to me, last year when I first heard there will be a meeting between President Trump and Chairman Kim, I thought of Korean film 강철비. It's Still Rain. I think some of you may see the film. That the content was thanks to the South-North reconciliation, Chairman, leader of the North came to the South, and he declared to give up nuclear weapons. And he was attacked here by the North Korean agent. So that was my first thinking. And then I thought about Mr. Gorbachev, who tried to reform the declining the Soviet Union. But he couldn't succeed because he tried only in the framework of communist rule. So I thought, really, whether Chairman Kim will make a kind of out-of-box thinking and out-of-box policy there. But after seeing Singapore summit and summit with President Moon, he used complete denuclearization. But so far, the problem is we don't have common understanding on the concept of that complete denuclearization, whether it is identical with FFVD or our own term. So that means still we don't have any final destination. So without having final destination, how can you discuss how to reach there? So the first thing is to have common understanding, and based on that, we have to reach there. So I mean, if Chairman Kim, with his own voice, make it clear that I have the same concept with you, then everything will be resolved.
You know, I attended in a Panmunjom summit, and also I attended the Pyongyang summit, and I talked with very senior North Korean officials. Yes, you know, I asked them what is meant by complete denuclearization. Complete denuclearization is a complete denuclearization, meaning what? Complete denuclearization of facilities, materials, bombs, and missiles. Okay. But therefore, as to the definition of complete denuclearization, I don't see any difference between the U.S. and North Korea. Issue is how, through what stages, you know. Therefore, really, look, in Panmunjom, Chairman Kim Jong-un told President Moon Jae-in, because President Moon raised the issue of complete denuclearization, because he knew when he was chief of staff to President Roh Moo-hyun in 2007. You know, at the time, President Roh worked very hard to put the complete even just denuclearization and the agenda of October 4th Joint Summit Declaration. North Korea refused at the time. But this time, Kim Jong-un simply said that if we talked with the Americans more frequently, if we build the trust with the U.S., okay, if we have some sort of non-aggression treaty with the U.S., why should we suffer by having nuclear weapons? And he further added, denuclearization is will of my grandfather and my father. At that point, President Moon came to the conclusion that he's really committed and willing to denuclearize it. Peter, you haven't, of course it was a long time ago, but you have been to North Korea, you built a windmill power plant near Pyongyang, and you have been working very closely with North Koreans. Not recently, but in old days you did. And you have been dealing with North Korean nuclear issue for the past 30 years. What is your take on North Korean intention and will toward the denuclearization?
I think denuclearization doesn't just mean the freezing, dismantlement, and disarmament of North Korea. It refers to the entire peninsula, and it means the reduction and then the elimination of nuclear threat against North Korea, as well as from North Korea against South Korea and its allies. It's a two-way street. So when you think about it in a sort of systematic peninsula-wide manner, you begin to see that the issue of reciprocal nuclear threat, sort of intention to annihilate the enemy with nuclear weapons, is really at the core of the issue. And they're quite realistic in that unless they can come up with a framework that captures American projection of nuclear threat specifically against North Korea in ways that are tangible, that they can monitor and verify, they're not going to give up their nuclear threat against South Korea and its allies. And so the challenge is to come up with a framework in which that is possible, that it's not just a negative security assurance from the United States to North Korea, and North Korea gives up its nuclear threat, but a framework that really captures and starts to manage the way that nuclear threat is introduced and maintained in the way great power relations in the region affect Korea, because they know that that can't be separated from American nuclear threat against North Korea unless there's a regional approach. And from a South Korean perspective, why would it be symmetrical and fair for the North Koreans to get a guarantee from the United States and South Korea to not get a guarantee from China and Russia? So when you start to look at it in a systematic way, you start to realize that some kind of framework that captures this issue of nuclear threat in both directions is required, and you end up with a nuclear weapon-free zone, either just in the Korean Peninsula or perhaps at a regional level might actually be more effective. That's a set of political and security trade-offs.
But that issue can come later because, we are all talking about denuclearization of the Korean Peninsula, but the starting point should be denuclearization of North Korea. Why? Because North and South Korea jointly adopted joint declaration on the denuclearization of Korean Peninsula in 1992. South Korea has been abiding by that joint declaration. North Korea is not. That is why we are calling for the denuclearization of North Korea. Of course, once North Korea makes progress toward the denuclearization of North Korea itself, then next stage we can talk about withdrawal of American nuclear umbrella provided to South Korea. What is your take on that argument?
Well, I don't actually think that you need to put the American nuclear umbrella on the table. You can manage nuclear threat without actually removing the nuclear umbrella. In the South Pacific, for example, Australia, my country of origin, is a member of a nuclear weapon-free zone, but also is the recipient, or at least asserts that it's the recipient of nuclear extended deterrence from the United States against actually unspecified external threats, but that is the claim. There's no inconsistency with having a nuclear umbrella to South Korea, which actually would not be aimed primarily at North Korea once a zone exists. It would actually be to deal with nuclear threat that might come from China or Russia in particular. So I don't think there's a contradiction.
We can
there
talk
at all.
about it a bit later.
Right.
Bob, what is your take on the Peter's observation?
I was listening to Peter, and there was something otherworldly about Peter, about the characterization here of what the North Koreans want. The North Koreans want to be free of any threat from American nuclear weapons. Then there's a real problem, because America, as you well know, has strategic nuclear weapons, and we don't need to station our nuclear weapons in the region to make them vulnerable to an American strike. So I have, in my talks with North Koreans, I have understood that they have been offended is an understatement, offended by our B-1 aircraft and the tracks that our B-1s fly. And I don't know whether you know this or not, but our B-1s that we fly that way are not nuclear capable right now. The North Koreans aren't interested in that little comment about the capability of our B-1 bombers. But if this is really a matter of politics and optics, I'm okay then with what you said, because we can do things. I think the exercises are an example of things that are in their face that they would like not to have in their face. And I think we are in the right place with respect to exercises. This, by the way, is not free in terms of military operations, but it's probably right for now. So I think there are things that can be done to remove as I said, the politics or optics of American military presence in Northeast Asia, and particularly nuclear-capable presence. But there are things that we are not going to address that way. What our submarines have and do is not going to be subject to a nuclear weapons-free zone in Northeast Asia. Our targeting capability of our strategic systems are, right now, our B-2s and our follow-on bombers. We have B-52s with air-launched cruise missiles, and we'll soon have follow-on bombers and follow-on missiles. And we have ICBMs, and they'll soon be modernized. And all this is going to continue, and I think we, the United States, will not regard this as relevant to a North Korean negotiation. So I think in political terms, there are certainly things along the lines you mentioned that the United States could do to improve the optics of this situation. But there are other things that I think the United States would be quite unwilling to do.
Yeah, but we can get into the topics a bit later. But Yong-Soo, you have been a long-time observer of North Korean nuclear weapons capability. From technical point of view, okay, is the complete denuclearization of North Korea feasible? If so, in what way?
I think that most audience in this room already watched the very famous film, Endgame. In Endgame, the villain, the Thanos, illustrates a very good, simple solution to solve the very ambitious mission, Endgame mission, with just magic 6 stones in your hand and with some small and simple finger snap like this, you can destroy the half of the universe instantaneously. Later, he changed his mind. So his final goal was to destroy the entire universe with his finger snap. We don't have that kind of magic. So technically, it will be very difficult, but we should find a way. If we cannot find a way, we have to create a way. So we are in one part of the clip, and they are in another part of the clip. So we have to construct a new way to connect with each other. And as an engineer, I'm working for the mission to satisfy the demand from the societies. As an engineer, my goal is to find a solution, a single solution or a set of solutions, pragmatically, timely, with good customer satisfactions. So this kind of mission is time-dependent matter, and we have to find a certain way. As pointed out by many presenters today, everything is better than nothing. So we should have a teamwork of the many different approach, like a pure science-based approach and some international politically based approach to assure the national security of the North Korea.
Now, we'll come back later. But
yes.
okay, since a nuclear engineer, okay,
Yes.
President Trump says that the North Korea has 5 nuclear facilities. Is it true?
Maybe or maybe not. It depends upon your vision. So for develop the nuclear bomb, at the early stage, you need a small laboratory scale experiment. And then you should move to the pilot scale experiment. Then you should work on the full scale experiment as time goes on. So there might be some scattered clandestine facilities.
Then now you have one in Yongbyon, okay, the 2 in Yongbyon, okay.
Yes.
There's a plutonium production facilities
Yes.
and highly uranium production facilities, plus lithium and
Some
tritium
yes.
laboratories, okay.
Yes.
Apart from Yongbyon,
Yes.
does North Korea have a highly enriched uranium program in Gangsan?
Probably not Gangsan, but in another places.
How about Bungang?
Bungang is a part of Yongbyon, so to me, it's the part of Yongbyon complex. But there might be some other places,
Such as?
the border between the Manchurian area and the northern part of the North Korea. There might be a strong chance that they might have some facility to produce the highly enriched uranium. So it will be very difficult to find out those facilities within a matter of days. For that one, actually, we need the combination of a technical approach and the political approach. So as pointed out by you today and by other presenters, what we really need is the trust building, technically and politically, step by step. It will be very time-consuming process. But without that one, we cannot make any success. Actually, as pointed out by many speakers today, we already have tons of the good agreement among 6 parties and already, like the one in 2005 in Beijing, and like the one so-called Leap Day agreement. So we know what's the end game missions. How to reach that mission is another matter. So we have to develop a lot of ways, political ones, to assure the regional permanent peace treaty in Northeast Asia, which is quite essential to assure the permanent peace in this area. So if you take a look at the reasons for the North Korea to develop the nuclear weapon, It's very simple to assure that their national security or regime security.
Yeah, we'll get to that point. But Peter, okay, if we want to have a complete denuclearization, North Korea got to declare how many nuclear production facilities they have, okay? How many nuclear materials that they have, how many nuclear bombs they have. But they have been refusing to declare. If North Korea does not declare, then how can we define complete denuclearization? How do you handle that problem?
I think you have to approach it incrementally. They're not going to declare everything at the outset because they know, first of all, there's probably going to be some mistakes in what they declare, even if they wanted to declare everything completely, because this is a big activity over many years. Material may just be unaccounted for, and they don't even realize it themselves. So to have that equation resolved with precision, you have to approach it systematically across every variable and keep on pushing the knowledge, both in terms of physical inspection, in terms of taking samples and analyzing the situation on the ground, in terms of going through the files, interviewing people at every step in the fuel cycle, in the weaponization, and in the deployment. And then you slowly, over time, increase the confidence in the understanding of the whole equation. The very process of doing that will move forward the politics and the other agendas that are required to build confidence, or it'll come to a screeching halt because you discover that you were being deceived, or that they were lying, or that there's some huge uncertainty that you cannot live with. But you will not end up at the beginning of this process with any degree of confidence. Even if they were to declare something, you really don't know. It'll take time. And more to the point, if they did make such a declaration, they know that we will pick holes in it, and we will find reason to argue with them over errors that they may make or that they introduce. And that kind of declaration would be a huge strategic error, and it's not going to happen at the outset.
Then what you're implying is this: you're opposing American proposal big deal in Hanoi. There's a North Korean proposal of incremental approach is more right approach.
Well, incremental.
Like now you're rejecting American proposal?
Well, I wasn't in Hanoi, but I can tell you now that incremental doesn't mean slow, and it doesn't mean small. The question is which increments and how fast can you move? And I think you can do some pretty big things that are important very quickly.
Minister Kim, what did you take on Hanoi? Because Hanoi was all about the mismatch between American big deal proposal and North Korean small deal proposal, okay? According to Western media. Then now both Yong-soo and Peter are now arguing that they have all technical background. They are saying that big deal is impossible. They got to be incremental. What did you take on that?
Well, in Hanoi, from the negotiation point of view, there was no zone of possible agreement there. And I think we have now top-down approach there. It has its strengths, and particularly in North Korea, everything should be decided by the leader himself. So top-down has its merit. But in order to have a successful top-down approach, then we need to have a working level meeting. But when I saw that North Koreans are not that enthusiastic about working level talks, I was really worried about, and it happened there. And also, I think because of that Singapore summit outcome, Chairman Kim, he was overconfident. Then he thought he can outsmart President Trump and he can manipulate him. And he temporarily forget that he's the master of negotiation. He can walk away at any time. So that's why it happened. And I think a big deal is still, is possible. I think it's much better than it's like a big deal means package deal is possible.
Yeah, but here, big deal versus small deal, top down versus bottom up, all this kind of approach. But Bob, you are saying that you're naying that the American approach is wrong. Why is that?
So I have the following 423 things I want to say. I want to start with we, the U.S. and the international community, have some experience with denuclearization. Everybody thinks about the IAEA and that, et cetera, but the case which I think is a good model for your questions, to think about your questions, is the disarmament of Iraq after the first Gulf War, when a regime, UNSCOM it was called, put together with the IAEA, took apart a weapons program in Iraq which had secret components to it, like the North Korean does, which had a plutonium track, like the North Korean does, which had an enrichment track, like the North Korean does, and it had a lot of scientists around. And it took a long time. And we were asking, just as you suggested, for a full and final declaration of everything they had, which was required by the Security Council resolution, which the Iraqis accepted. And they gave us one. And they kept having to revise it because the full and final declaration kept getting changed as we kept finding that it was a lie. So I was thinking, as Peter was describing, that would be embarrassing for the North Koreans. And I can't imagine them, you can tell me if I'm wrong about Koreans, tolerating that embarrassment the way the Iraqis did. It was impossible to embarrass the Iraqis. I mean, you know, you caught us, that's another one. And we just went on. But I would encourage people to think about how the Special Commission went about taking apart the Iraqi nuclear weapons program for its robust character. The second point I want to make is that when you ask, you should think about the physical limits of what you can accomplish and what verification procedures would have to involve in terms of compromise of North Korean sovereignty. Think about that. Think about the anytime, any place character of inspections that every inspector wants. I want to be able to go any place I want in your country immediately. I don't want to have to wait, as we do under the agreement with Iran, 21 days if you object. Right? So we don't want any sites cleaned up. That's very hard to do, to get a country to allow external inspectors, whomever they may be, and the North Koreans have never had much affection for the IAEA, and they may prefer, in fact, an ad hoc inspection group. But think about the intrusiveness of the inspection. Third thing, think about how small nuclear weapons are relative to the size of a country, and think about how much even smaller the fissile material, whether it be plutonium or highly enriched uranium, is for a single weapon. And how many dining room tables there may be in North Korea under which you could put enough fissile material for 100 nuclear weapons. Let's put criticality issues aside here for a moment and say, okay, can you get under all those dining room tables? We will do estimates because we'll require the North Koreans to tell us, you know, the operating history of their centrifuge cascades, the operating history of their reactor, and we'll estimate how much plutonium, how much highly enriched uranium, but there'll be fairly large error factors. And so they'll say, okay, we're going to give you all our accumulated plutonium and accumulated highly enriched uranium, and maybe they don't. Maybe they actually have full weapons that they don't turn over. We have to understand that there are physical realities here, wholly apart from the desirable political reality of getting to zero. So that all has to be part of the kind of answers to your questions that you were asking. The one you actually asked me went to, what about the top down, and what about the big deal versus the small deal? For someone who is committed to old think, like I am, I always thought that we would applaud the President of the United States if he succeeded. But if he didn't succeed, we were going to point out how nutty it is to have him try to negotiate one of these deals, whether it be at Singapore or Hanoi or anywhere else. That once he is the expected negotiator, he caponizes, forgive me, all the other negotiators. How hard is it for Steve Biegun now to engage the North Koreans when they know that the last time they dealt with Steve, the president overruled him? We call this in football parlance, called an automatic at the line. He just changed it. So who can negotiate with the North Koreans now other than Donald Trump? That's a huge reason for not doing this that way. And the big deal versus the small deal, I don't understand the big deal and never have, and I would need somebody to explain to me how, under the circumstances that we have, one could ask for a big deal in which North Korean performance must precede American performance, right? They do everything before we do anything. Does that sound like a deal that is going to be struck?
But Mr. John Bolton says that we can take the nuclear materials and bombs and take them all the way to the Oak Ridge in Tennessee so that they can dismantle them. Is it doable?
Is it, I'm sorry, is it what?
Bolton says
Yes.
that North Korea should give up. It's a nuclear biochemical, and then he will dismantle them back in Tennessee. Of course, the resident of state of Tennessee will oppose, but he doesn't seem to care.
So we are not going to be taking any North Korean nuclear weapons to the United States of America. I'm fairly certain. But having said that, I think when John Bolton talks about denuclearization and includes ballistic missiles and doesn't limit the range of the ballistic missiles he's including, and then throws in an ad hoc way chemical weapons and biological weapons. This is not, you ask a question of, could we get to denuclearization? This is not someone who wants to get to a negotiated, because he doesn't believe in it. The chemical and biological weapons issue is not a minor one, not for North Korea. That program, those programs in North Korea are quite secret, but quite robust. And wasn't a small addition that Bolton threw in, wholly apart from whether we are going to be taking their weapons to the United States.
But anyhow, if you really wanted to have a North Korean end game, okay, North Korea should give up, okay? It's the nuclear facilities, materials, bombs, and missiles. And plus, North Korea should go the process of, freeze, declaration, inspection, verification, and dismantling. Let us assume that North Korea will go for incremental simultaneous exchange. Then here, big issue is, what can we do for North Korea? And Mr. John Bolton says that if North Korea gives up nuclear, biochemical, and missiles, we will promise bright future of North Korean economy. Okay, the Babson is there. I don't know what is meant by the bright feature of North Korean economy, but here, what can we give to North Korea if we want to have a negotiated settlement of North Korean nuclear issue, right? And then we should give something to North Korea. Then I think in terms of political, military, economic, and other technical kind of things. Minister Kim, what kinds of political reward does North Korea want from the U.S. and international community?
Definitely is security guarantee plus economic aid. But at the first stage, North Korean denuclearization process can be, we can say, compartmentalized, or it can be divided in several phases. But easing sanctions, lifting sanctions, even though UN lifted some sanctions there, it may affect, even though it's only partial lifting, it may affect the whole sanction system. That's the problem. So because of that, at that initial stage, we have to make a kind of some creative thinking there, how to match the timing and the sequences. So in that area, I think something should be done first by North Korea. So maybe North Korea may think why we should do always first. But if we look into the structure of the issues now, then it is somewhat inevitable. But US, they can make a guarantee on that anyhow. And afterwards, if we do this, definitely it will be done. So,
but Minister Kim, security assurance or security guarantee or negative security assurance or positive security assurance, but bottom line is this: North Korea wants full diplomatic normalization with the United States, right?
Yeah,
That's right.
yeah, right.
But
that can be. You see, already they agreed to do that. If you're looking back in the 1990s, So even though sanction is there, they start to negotiate on normalization. And it can, if they decide, it can be done within a short period of time.
Yeah, but if you go back to Geneva Agreed framework of 1994, which Bob negotiated,
Right,
and if you go
right.
back to September 19th joint statement of 2005, there are all those elements. Okay.
Right.
But Peter, what did you take on this? Do you think that the U.S. can come up with definite? Whenever I go to Washington, I have big debate with Washington pundits. Their basic argument is this: diplomatic normalization should be placed at an exit stage, not entry stage. But when I talked with the North Koreans, they want diplomatic normalization at the entry stage. There's a huge difference in anticipation. Peter, what did you take on that one?
Well, I think it's fairly straightforward. If you're going to end hostility, quote unquote, the most effective way to create a peace treaty is to normalize diplomatic relations. It's really straightforward. What comes after that is sort of a practical question of what do they want in material terms. Now, there hasn't been much discussion this afternoon in the previous sessions or even today about one of the elements, which is energy and economic assistance. And my sense is that that's actually a very important, essential element, and without that, you won't actually have real progress in all the other elements. They're all limiting conditions. They're all simultaneously required in order to move forward quickly, incrementally, and in tandem. So we have done some thinking about the energy side. My sense from interacting with American colleagues is that there's very limited understanding in Washington about the energy situation in North Korea or about the realistic options for engaging North Korea on energy assistance. Part of that is because some years ago, the relevant sections of the US government were unfunded as a budgetary reality, and much of the capacity to address these issues at the US Department of Energy has been unstaffed, has been dismantled. So there's not actually a backstop, except in some elements of the intelligence community, to really do technical, quantitative analysis of these issues, and energy is actually a quantitative matter. Fortunately, we do have some data. Things are moving quite quickly in North Korea on their energy systems. In the last 3 years alone, they have constructed and installed roughly 1 gigawatt, 1,000 megawatts of diesel small and large generators, photovoltaic systems, and wind generators. This is nearly a third of their current operating capacity. Just in 3 years, they've increased by a third. Similarly, on the oil front, before the sanctions were imposed, they imported at least one gasification unit from China, whereby they can take coal and make refined product. And that single unit, by our calculations, is enough to produce about 10% of their refined product demand. Currently, in the past, the military use of refined product in North Korea, of oil, is about 15% of their total usage. So that one gasification unit was nearly sufficient to take the coal that was being exported to China and is now available because of the sanctions in North Korea, it's not being exported, and make diesel and gasoline and aviation fuel out of coal. So it's not as if the sanctions are crippling their economy. The question is, what could you do very quickly that doesn't actually break the sanctions, the maximum pressure, but still delivers real energy services in a way that's not divertible? And it's not actually very difficult to think through. In, say, 6 months, you could send, by our calculations, for about $70 million, enough insulation to insulate 10% of the apartment buildings in Pyongyang. And from beginning to end, it would take 6 months to do that, $70 million. You could similarly build a microgrid A microgrid is a very small grid built around one generator, and what this does is prefigure the bottom-up reconstruction of the power grid in North Korea, which is inevitably the way it's going to be done. They're not going to build one large new system. And it seems to us that this is something that South Korea and the allies and the other international community partners could actually do, deliver energy services that would increase real welfare in households, in hospitals, in clinics, in a way that if Kim Jong-un is serious about the welfare of his people, could be done very quickly, in less than 6 months, for less than $100 million.
Which is well taken.
Right, creative. We've got to be creative
No, but
here.
does it violate the UN's
No,
Security Council sanction resolutions?
Well, sending insulation material to North Korea to insulate buildings, I don't see why that would not be a humanitarian project and could be exempt from the sanctions, both UN Security Council, American and South Korean sanctions. Purely a humanitarian project.
There's so many humanitarian projects which have been blocked by the U.S.
Well, no, they've
by
been made more difficult.
even the South Korean government.
Yeah, well, we still have humanitarian projects in North Korea from American non-governmental organizations. Even today, it's tough to get it, but right now you can apply for a permit and you should get a license from OFAC.
Okay, Daniel, energy need is a good point. Yong-soo, from technical point of view, what would North Korea want from outside in return for the denuclearization?
Already pointed by Peter, energy is the most important one. I think that Peter explained some outline for the short-term energy supply plan. In addition, we might need a long-term plan to support their energy prosperity in the future. So as you know, the North Korea is good for the heavy industry. So they need a good support for the baseload electricity along with the nationwide grid network. Peter just mentioned the micro-scale series of the network, and we have to combine all of them into the nationwide grid network later on. And it might be difficult to implement those things in a day right now, but what we can do is to design all the detailed plan for the long-term energy supply to meet their demand and to meet their demand in the civilian society with a full consultation with the international bodies. Firstly, we can start that project between United States and South Korea. Then we can invite the people from North Korea and from Japan. It will be the good measure actually to build the confidence among all concerned parties for this kind of work. Secondly, we can work to develop the good system to take care of all the workers in North Korea working on the current WMD programs. Even though they are a little bit hostile to the national security of South Korea at this moment, if you take a look at the North Korean side, they are the national heroes actually for their national securities. And without providing some solid plan to manage them in long time span, I think there will be big difficulty to build a real trust building among South and North and the United States and Japan and China. So we have to develop a lot of good detailed scheme from yesterday. We are late actually. So that kind of a proposal and potential engagement is the key for the trust building and our ultimate end game mission completion, the real permanent peace around this Korean peninsula.
By the way, does complete denuclearization of North Korea include the ban on peaceful use of atomic energy in North Korea?
I don't believe so. As stipulated in the joint statement in 2005, there was a special section to assure the peaceful use of the nuclear energy in North Korea also. And we already promised among 6 party members how to encourage the North Korean people to use nuclear energy peacefully is another issue. We have to also concerned about global nuclear security issues. for that mission, I think we have a good lesson from JCPOA. So, for example, we developed all the concept about fuel leasing and take back. That means we will not allow the large scale or any kind of scale of the reprocessing and the enrichment in North Korea. But we can allow them, and we can cooperate actually very tightly to produce the nuclear energy without any violation of the global non-nuclear proliferation regime at all, actually. We can do that, actually. We learned a lot of lessons, and we have some good technology to support that kind of idea if we really want to go for that way. So we should be very open-minded, as pointed out by many people in previous sections. If we have a mind setting already and does not want to change our mind at all, then we'll end up with nothing. What we really need is the open mind and try to understand the real energy demand from North Korea and try to find not the best or ideal way, but the optimum way to meet that kind of demand throughout the international cooperation. I think we can achieve that one.
Look, Geneva Agreed Framework had invented in a
Yes.
great institution,
Yes.
Korea Peninsula Energy Development Kido system.
Yes.
That is a beautiful system. Your product, your invention. What happened? In other words, we can learn from the past. Okay, for example, we can really re-establish, Kido type of, international organization to support, energy development in North Korea. Even we can think about this, just, renting, our Hanaro nuclear reactor to North Korea, which are not, weapons usable. But anyhow, therefore, Minister Kim talked about, political, the requirements for the denuclearization of North Korea, and Peter and Young talk about the technical energy, and even economic one. How about military? What kinds of security assurance does North Korea want? Because apparently North Korea wants a non-aggression treaty with the United States. Is it doable?
I generally, when I think about the security assurances, I think that what would not be difficult would be negative security assurances, where we essentially tell the North Koreans that we will not use or threaten to use nuclear weapons. This is, of course, becomes, in a sense, almost automatic if we get the North Koreans back into the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. There's a negative security assurance to those countries, but the North Koreans back in the day wanted a specific assurance, which we actually never got to provide them. So what I'm getting to here, Chung-In, is that there's an easy answer to security assurances if we're talking about negative security assurances. Not hard to do. Positive security assurances, which begin to sound like an alliance, is another matter. And I have not heard a discourse on what it is the U.S. is thinking about, or what even the North Koreans are thinking about with respect to security assurances. So if someone could speak to that, I really can't. I could tell you which is easy and which is hard, but that's about all.
But Bob, would North Korea ask the withdrawal of American forces from South Korea and readjustment of allocate U.S. alliance as one of precondition for denuclearization of North Korea?
I'm sorry, I'm missing the action part of this. What has to happen on the U.S.
No,
side?
withdrawal of American forces
Yeah.
from South Korea, and also readjustment
I
of
see.
alliance as a precondition for its own denuclearization.
For me, when I have heard, as you know, in Washington, some people have asserted that the North will require the removal of U.S. forces from South Korea, the deconstruction of the alliance, all as conditions for their denuclearization. This is news to me. I haven't heard this from North Koreans. I've heard this from people who are opposed to a deal with North Korea, and they want to make it as hard as possible. So I think if you want to make it as hard as possible, you can do things like you must undo the alliance structure in Northeast Asia. Now, I understand that the alliance we have with Japan, the Mutual Security Treaty, is easily applicable to a threat from someplace other than North Korea, such as China. The alliance we have with South Korea is different in a sense, and our understanding about what happens in various contingencies is special to the Korean case. But I don't see, on the face of it, at least not yet, any requirement for a deconstruction of our alliance, the U.S.-ROK alliance, or necessarily of the profile of U.S. forces. However, and this is a really big however for me, we have talked about and even done some manipulation of the presence of forces, the numbers of forces, and the operation of forces in South Korea in the context of our alliance. And we can do that, I think, without damaging the alliance. I mean, there'll be limits to that. But I don't think we should leap to the horn of that dilemma and say, well, we've got to do basic things to alter the alliance. The alliance from the American perspective, and I think ultimately from the ROK's perspective, is going to have a value that will endure beyond any settlement we make with the North.
Foreign Minister Kim, what did you take on the, Bob's observation?
Well, I mean, North Koreans, they never specified what that security guarantee means. Simply thinking that we are now on the nuclear umbrella of the United States. If China is the ally of the North Korea, then they can get that kind of umbrella from China. But North Korea, they don't want it. That's why they want to talk only with the United States. That's their long-standing goal. So I think, but in U.S. case, it's not that easy. So in that security guarantee area, I think multilateral approach is needed there. So if we can make kind of security mechanism in this area, then as was stipulated in the six-party talks, 2005, September 19th joint statement, there is a special working group there. But I think through that multilateral approach, we can address the issue, I think.
Okay, yes, please go ahead.
I want to point out that I think for some of us, the whole concept of security assurances has been damaged to a degree by the security assurances that Ukraine sought and got. And that the character of that assurance to Ukraine was that the Brits, the Russians, and the Americans said that we would not compromise Ukrainian security after they gave up their nuclear weapons.
Sovereignty and territoriality.
Yes.
Sovereignty and territoriality.
And we saw what has happened both with Crimea and with eastern Ukraine at the hands of the Russians. I have heard people say, well, the UK and the US didn't hold up its part of the bargain. Not true. Our assurance wasn't to act to protect Ukrainian security, but not to compromise it ourselves. But that's what the Russians did. So the extension of an assurance by a nuclear weapon state of that kind is now, I think, open to serious question by anyone. So I think the North would be very interested in a security assurance which might actually carry some meaning for them, because it's clear some don't.
Okay, 우리 플로어에서 질문을 받도록 하겠습니다. As I promised, I'll be taking some questions or comments from the floor. We have just 20 minutes to go. Please identify yourself and make just short comments and short questions. Please. 여기 마이크 앞에다 가 있어. 빨리빨리 움직이지 좀.
I have a question for Ambassador Gallucci.
Would you please identify yourself?
My name is Won Hyuk Lim. I'm with KDI School. As you said, it's one thing to talk about politics and optics, and quite another to talk about actual military capabilities. So just as you said, American submarines and bombers and so on off the table. But as far as politics and optics are concerned, United States could provide, better relationship, work out a better relationship with North Korea. Then on the other side, North Koreans could say, as far as politics and optics are concerned, we are not going to do any more nuclear tests, ICBM tests or whatever. But as far as actual military capabilities are concerned, we'd like to retain the deterrence capability, at least to strike Guam, Japan, and South Korea, right? So, especially given what has happened to Ukraine and Iran. Any U.S. politician could come in and just eliminate what has been accomplished, right? So, suppose North Korea does say that it likes to retain minimum, deterrence capability, the ability to strike U.S. forces in Guam, okay, in exchange for better relations with the United States, not touching U.S. Strategic assets, and not having to do any, not demanding alliance change or whatever. Would the United States be willing to go for that kind of bargain?
No. I mean, a slightly longer answer would be that one can start engage on a topic as you have anywhere you want. You can start by saying, what right does the United States or even the international community have to tell a sovereign state what it can have to achieve its security objectives? What right do we have to say, you can't have nuclear weapons, you can have nuclear weapons? And that's a long discussion about international justice, about the nature of the international system, and about international law, et cetera, et cetera. I don't think we want to go there. When you go to the question of, well, what, in practical terms, what would the United States accept, which is how I was really speaking before, I think we are sort of unabashedly and unashamed saying that we're looking for North Korea to give up its nuclear weapons capability and to diminish its capability to regenerate it as much as possible, and its delivery capability. The general context in which we argue this is that the international community has almost universally embraced the Nuclear Nonproliferation Treaty. We have the outliers, Israel, Pakistan, India, and now North Korea again. But everybody else has pretty said that's a good idea. If we want to sustain that, then the United States should do nothing to legitimize nuclear weapons in North Korea. We have allies which have made a decision to achieve their security objectives in the context of alliances with the United States, both Japan and North Korea. I would go on and say, and NATO and Australia, et cetera. But those are decisions these countries have made, and they have given up the nuclear weapons option. For the United States to legitimize nuclear weapons in North Korea, I think would raise questions about how South Korea, Japan, and others think about how they achieve their security objectives. Are we committed to the idea of preventing the spread of nuclear weapons, limiting the number of nuclear weapons as much as possible, reducing the capability of those weapons through arms control, or are we not? And that's the context, I think, Americans would argue the legitimacy of its position that North Korea should not have nuclear weapons.
This is, the Brad Babson is here. Brad Babson used to work for the World Bank, and then he, in fact, went to Pyongyang in, I think, year 2002 or 2001, and he trained the North Korean, the financial and economic officers. What do you think that the North Korea won for economic compensation in return for denuclearization? Why don't you make some comments? Because he's a superb expert on North Korean economy.
Okay, well, I'm going to this is an advertisement for tomorrow morning. Let me take this off. First of all, the point I would make is that economic security has to be understood as an essential part of any national security equation. And with Kim Jong-un's acceptance of giving high priority, at least equal and maybe now even more than equal attention to economic development as a national priority, that economic security has to be understood as central to their agenda and how they accomplish that. It's not only regime security, but it's also future longer-term economic security. And I think finding the formula that will give them confidence that they can enter into a set of relationships with other partners, countries, international organizations, private investors, that will allow them to keep some control over their future economic destiny and not be railroaded by other interests that interplay with the economic opportunities that exist in North Korea, is going to be at the very center of their interests, not only the nuclear issues and how this all plays out. And the only other comment, yeah, and let me just see that I think that they are really going to be sensitive to how they're treated as an economic partner. And what strikes me about most of the interactions with the foreign community around the whole nuclear negotiation is how little conversations there have been with senior economic officials. I think if I think back to the role of track 2 or 1.5, the nuclear people and the military people are quite often have opportunities to engage with counterparts in the political and in even technical areas in track 2 kind of conversations. But I can tell you, I can't remember any serious senior level involvement of economic officials in these kind of dialogue sessions. The one that I'm reminded of is the technical working group that was established to deal with the BDA problem in 2005 in parallel to the six-party talks, because having gotten into the mess of the BDA, it was impeding the ability of the six-party talks to proceed. And the way out of it was to create a technical working group with American financial officials and North Korean financial officials to navigate a way out of that dilemma to get the six-party talks back on track. And that was a very productive moment of interacting among financial and economic officials, but I've seen almost no senior level discussions with North Koreans, and we don't know as much about what they really think and what they really are doing in the economic area as we do in the military and security areas.
Jeju Forum, in fact, invited the North Korean senior economic officials to attend, and particularly in cooperation with the Davos Forum, but they didn't respond. Okay, yes, please.
Thank you. My name is Joseph Kim from the World Council of Churches. As a body of churches, we have engaged in the dialogue with North Korean society over the last 40 years. As we know, when we sit together with North Koreans, they often talk about the U.S. hostility against North Korea. I think it seems to me Americans has failed to understand what the hostility means for the North Koreans, particularly from emotional and psychological perspective. I think that's why the North Koreans, they want to have non-aggression treaty to secure themselves, not only for politically, but also for emotionally. I have a question to the Ambassador Gallucci, whether would it be possible for the U.S. really sign up a non-aggression policy with North Korea? You have used North Korea very convenient ways to go for war option without declaring war with the approval of the Congress. So if you sign up non-aggression treaty, that means giving up a first strike or target or war option in your diplomacy.
Okay, Bob.
Do you think you're ready to sign?
Maybe Minister Kim, you can answer too. You have good understanding of North Korean perception of external hostility.
So I want to say two things. One, I think you're right about the United States not very often crediting the North Koreans as being serious when they complain about a hostile policy on the part of the United States of America. I think they are serious, and the manifestation of a hostile policy sometimes comes in the kind of military activity that we engage in regularly, which they find directed at them in a hostile way. So I think more thought on taking the North Koreans seriously on this point would be a good idea for the United States of America. With respect to whether an executive branch would find themselves unhappily restrained to act independently, to launch military operations, kinetic, I take it from what you said, against North Korea, if we had a non-aggression commitment, I don't think that's the problem. I think that we would be committing ourselves to, if it were, I mean, these can be phrased lots of different ways. If it's focused particularly on nuclear weapons, it is not to use or threaten to use nuclear weapons. Non-aggression, and this has a very strange sound to many of us because of past non-aggression pacts that didn't work out so well, but a non-aggression commitment would not be limited to the use of nuclear force, but it would be limited to the use of force against North Korea. And then we'd have to look at the actual language. But I don't think the stumbling block politically for the United States would be hampering the use of force by the executive branch without a declaration of war by the Congress. I don't see that as an obstacle. I really don't.
Minister Kim?
If we look back in the past experience already, U.S. once made we will not adopt hostile policy against North Korea, and also, as far as I remember, we will not invade, they used the word, right? So even Bush administration, they included hostile intent, no hostile intent.
I guess, yes.
Yeah, so the hostility, when North Koreans say hostility, if it means non-aggression pact or treaty, I think treaty pact, it will be very difficult. But declaration by the president or guarantee by the president, if North Koreans can accept that, then I think the U.S. can do that. Yeah.
One final comment or question from the floor. Yoshi, you wanted to raise a question? Professor Soya? No? Okay, since they have to rush to the airport, why don't I invite you to, you make a final comment on how to get to the North Korean nuclear end game. Just 1 minute each. Please, you start with Bob.
So I'm somewhat hopeful that, although I must say, Chang-en, I was hopeful that Hanoi was going to be successful largely because of the political convenience of success, that President Trump and Chairman Kim had invested in working out an arrangement. They had invested in this dialogue personally and in their capitals. So I thought high chance of success. I was wrong. And so I'm prepared to be wrong again, but I would say that investment is still there on part of both. And I think the Chairman Kim has wanted to show a sensitivity to the American election cycle and point out that he wants response of a different kind than he got at Hanoi before the end of this year. Because if it goes into next year and the President of the United States is still saying, North Korea put in the win column for me as a successful negotiator because I, President Trump, avoided war on the Korean Peninsula and everything is fine. That will not sound so good if North Korea is testing ballistic missiles that are not unambiguous, that are not ambiguously ballistic missiles. So what my point here is that I think we have a chance to get back to the negotiating table. Unfortunately, I think it has to be the president once again, because that's the character of top-down symmetry. But I think if we look for reciprocity, if we look for reasonable, verifiable steps, as Peter said before, they don't have to be terribly slow steps. You can pick up the pace here, and you can make material progress both on reduction of sanctions, which the North Korean foreign minister indicated after the failure of the talks in Hanoi that exactly what they want in sanctions relief. We know pretty much what we want as a material manifestation of the first steps towards denuclearization. If we're reasonable about this, I think we can make some progress.
Minister Kim?
I'm still not. I'm still have some trigger of hope for the second half of this year. Because of recent provocations by North Korea, people are rather pessimistic. But as I already said, I am cautiously optimistic because North Korean, leader himself committed himself already, and there is sunken cost. They met twice, and I know that last year when I went to China together with Professor Moon, we heard that one Chinese scholar very close to North Korean situation, he said after Kim Jong-un decided to adopt the nuclearization process, bureaucrats, party was divided. He was worried about that. So I think Chairman Kim needs to address their concerns as well, the hardliners. So I think this is a process of regaining his own authority. So this second half, we hope there will be some progress. And it is very important not to lose moment of dialogue. And I really want to advise North Koreans that, this dialogue process started by the initiative of the Korean government. And that's why, rather than purposely behave at the moment, then they ask a consultation with Korean government, then there will be much, much more opportunity to make a progress there.
Peter?
Well, it was a while ago, but I do remember when we were constructing the power plant in North Korea, we were next to a military base. In fact, there was an anti-aircraft artillery unit next to the field that we were working in, and we would see the military going out into the fields, working in the military, in agriculture, partly also to make sure that people weren't stealing the grain off the stalk because they were so hungry. And our impression at the time was that a very large fraction of the North Korean military are young people who are very poor and have nothing much else to do. They're not really soldiers, they're in uniform. And practically speaking, one of the biggest problems that Kim Jong-un has is to somehow demobilize and redeploy a rather large military force. And so security in this context doesn't just mean negative security. It doesn't mean that they become an ally, but it does mean that they have to become, I think, some kind of partner on security issues. You have to construct peace. You don't just stop war. You have to make a change which really goes to people's hearts and minds. I never imagined in my wildest thinking about Korea that I would see Kim Jong-un cross the military demarcation line and for UN command to be responsible for his personal safety. This was an astounding thing to see. And so the question to me, when you look at that military economic conundrum that they have that is so central when you think of the role of the military in the North Korean economy, what kind of role at a military to military level, UN command, US Forces Korea, South Korean military, China, Russia, but also all the other UN command allies will play in working with the North Korean military to first communicate, secondly to cooperate with them, and thirdly to actually collaborate in ways that create peace, not just deal with security issues. There are lots of things that could be done that are along these lines. Surveillance of fisheries, joint search and rescue operations. There are many, many agendas here, and we need to start. It's very urgent, and that to me is as important actually as the first steps on the denuclearization, quote-unquote, process, because that gets at the underlying conflict on the peninsula.
Yong-soo?
As far as we understand very clearly, we understand that Rome was not built in a day. We need a lot of effort. The easiest one is to have a big deal within a matter of days. Then you don't have to worry about the future. But it's not feasible, actually. So what we need is, in practice, is the kind of step-by-step approach with a lot of detailed action plan and pilot scale or small scale good examples. And for that one, we should work together, actually. Firstly, between United States and South Korea, and then among South Korea and North Korea and the United States, to have a lot of confidence building. Then we can invite our neighboring societies together, and that's the only way, technologically and politically, to invite all the concerned parties to the table and to make a real benefit for our universal goal, the peaceful denuclearization of Korean Peninsula. So that one, we should work together for anything, to me, from yesterday. We are late. But whenever you realize that you are late, then you can create another better opportunity to overcome the real difficulty. For the mission, we should work together as a team. I see a lot of economists in this room. All we are concerned about is how to reduce the future risk. The future risk cannot be eliminated in a second. We have to work together very precisely with a team spirit among all concerned parties to develop a set of solutions. There is no single solution to solve this problem. If we know the solution, then we could solve the problem yesterday. Then we should not have this kind of meeting. So for that one, we need a team effort.
And, talking about the North Korean nuclear endgame seems too premature. That is one important conclusion. And second important conclusion, big deal may not work. Incrementalism is the only way to reach the end game. And third, bilateral or unilateral fixation of North Korean nuclear problem seems virtually impossible. We need multilateral cooperation. And also, we need patience and prudence in dealing with North Korea. I think that those kinds of lessons are the things which we could have learned from today's discussion. Let us give a big applause to the panelists.